Hello and welcome to The Audible, presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Ralph Russo from The Athletic, joined today by my colleague Bruce Feldman. Stuart Mandel is enjoying some well-deserved vacation time. Later in the show, we will have a couple of segments with The Athletic's draft expert, Dane Brugler. Combine week next week, big week for you, Bruce, as well. I think you're heading to the Combine. And we'll go into the importance of the Combine, what this draft class looks like. Bruce did a great story on Fernando Mendoza. We'll hit all of that with Dane. But as usual, we'll start the show with some news and notes. And, luckily, my colleague Bruce is a bit of an insomniac. So very early this morning on the West Coast, we woke up to the news that Northern Illinois, yes, the coaching carousel is operating again. Northern Illinois head coach Thomas Hammock is leaving that job to take a position as the running backs coach with the Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. So, again, we were on top of the news, very much thanks to Bruce. Bruce, I wanted to listen. It's an interesting move, and it's tough. It's a tough move for Northern Illinois at this point in the year to have to make a coaching change. They're going to stay within. They promoted Bob Harley, the defensive coordinator there, who is going to be the interim coach for the rest of the season. I think they're hoping that stability, keeping somebody in-house, make sure they don't lose a whole bunch of players at a weird portal period, because that happens. Once you officially name a coach, those players have the ability to jump into the portal. So they're hoping to keep their team together. But it sort of speaks to this trend we've seen in the last few years with especially G5 coaches, head coaches, leaving for opportunities at the NFL or P4 level that are not head coaching opportunities. It's a tough deal for these G5 schools to keep their head coaches, Bruce.
It is, because I think it's such a juggling act where you don't have the resources. Maybe you don't have the NIL budget to keep up. I mean, look, Alabama has two guys who are head coaches and
That's
left.
Right.
Kane Womack, who's the defense coordinator, was at South Alabama. Mo Linguist was at Buffalo. Now he's on the defensive staff. It's not unprecedented, right? Hammock was the guy who led them to that big upset in South Bend over Notre Dame a couple of years ago. He did work with Mike McDonald on the Ravens staff for like 5 or 6 years when they were both assistants. So I was like, okay, you're going to Seattle. I think it's obviously it's a tough job to make it a go of it. Remember, this is an example to me that I think got a lot of people's eyes in coaching is Jeff Hafley, who we both think pretty highly of as a coach, did a really good job when he came back from the NFL as Ohio State's defensive coordinator, goes to Boston College, seemed like he'd be a good fit, struggled to get traction there. And then right before I think he was probably going to be on the hot seat, he ends up bouncing to the Packers to be the defensive coordinator, does a really good job there, and ends up getting the Miami Dolphins head coaching job. Like, I think other people have looked at that and said, because here's another example. Scott Simons does a really good defense coordinator at SMU. He leaves that job to become the inside linebackers coach at the Cowboys like a week or two ago. Because I think they look and go, you know what? If I do a really good job, I believe in myself, I could be a coordinator in a couple of years. I could be a head coach in the NFL potentially in a few years. And so I think that's the part that I think catches people's eyes in the college world, where it's like, hey, maybe this is a better path forward. It's a little more manageable off season and calendar, because the calendar drives all these coaches crazy, Ralph. So I don't know if it's so much more than it was like 2 years ago, because right after this, I'm thinking Dylan McCullough, really good running back coach who was on the Raiders staff last year. He's like talking to Oklahoma about becoming their running backs coach. So you have guys who come back. Obviously, Chip Kelly was the offense coordinator in Vegas, and now he's in Evanston, Illinois. So at Northwestern, I do think we report on a lot of the guys who leave. Sometimes we overlook the guys who come back because that's where the jobs are. Given that, cycle.
I also think it also speaks to this idea of just because you're on the hot seat or you're not working out doesn't mean you're a bad coach, right? The Hafley situation I thought was a really good example of like, he came in and was hired at Boston College. The pandemic season hit. NIL became a thing, just like the world completely changed of college football around the job he took, and it wasn't the same job. And while he wasn't doing terribly, I think he saw the writing on the wall. Like, hey man, like this job is not giving me a great path to success. So let me revert and head back to the NFL. And it's turned out like he's a good coach.
Really
the
good
job
coach.
was a tough job. Hammock has proven to be a pretty good coach. 3 bowl seasons, never won a MAC championship. But he seems to be a good coach. Now, MAC schools are tough, man. Like those jobs kind of bounce around. As you said, now with the portal, your roster, you're practically rebuilding every year. But I also think it's fair to say, coming off a 3-9 season, he probably looked at his situation and went, if things don't hit with my newly rebuilt roster this year, now all of a sudden I'm looking at possibly being fired this year. Now he's an alum. So I don't think Sean Frazier, the AD there, was like dying to get rid of him, but you have to make those coaches have to make that self-assessment. Mo Linguist, I think, was in a similar situation at Buffalo where he was doing okay, but it wasn't really gaining a ton of momentum. And I think he looked at it and said, like, listen, I'm a pretty good coach. Like, why? I don't want to get fired like at a tough job. So I don't want to overlook that part of it. Like Thomas Hammock probably was going into a season where could have gone either way at his college coaching job. So why not go to a more stable place in the NFL? Again, to me, it's just tough for, you mentioned Hafley in the BC, but for these G5 schools. Scott Loeffler left last year. Bowling Green, he had finally gotten some momentum at Bowling Green. He became the Eagles' quarterback coach. I just think of these G5 schools especially, you think you might have somebody to build around. And not only do you lose them, but you lose them at the toughest time, Bruce.
Yeah, I mean, and that's it. Like you said, I mean, at one point, I think you referenced Harley being for the rest of the year. I mean, yeah, it's the rest of the year, but it's like we're a long way for the season starting, and all of a sudden you're in that kind of status.
All right, last little bit of news, and it's not really college football news; it's college basketball news, but it's something I want to get off my chest, Bruce, and I'm interested to see if you agree with me. So yesterday, and we were taping this on Wednesday last night. Iowa beats Nebraska in basketball, upsets Nebraska in basketball. Iowa fans storm the court. Nebraska's had a very good year under Fred Hoiberg, the former Bulls coach there. And during, this is the reason why we worry about court stormings and field rushings and stormings in football, right? Because fans get a little too exuberant and maybe they don't behave themselves and they interact with the coaches and players. And somebody tried to run up to Hoiberg and throw a cell phone camera in his face, and he sort of took a swipe. Didn't get the camera, but unfortunately he got an Iowa assistant coach or videographer. Like he kind of knocked him in the head. It was nothing like that bad. My guess is Fred's probably going to have to issue a little bit of an apology. Sorry, I need to keep my cool a little bit. But here's my point, Bruce, and I want to ask you this. I think more fans should get punched. I think if you act like that, if you go up and taunt a player or a coach, I don't mean like you should get like your teeth knocked out. I'm not wishing like horrible injury on anybody, but I think if you're going to act like an idiot and taunt a player or coach in that situation, especially a player in football. I always really worry about this because I like the court storming and the field storming stuff. It feels fun. Like we shouldn't necessarily take that away. And schools and conferences are trying to make it a little more manageable and more peaceful. But man, if you go up to a football player and like trash talk him after a game, I kind of think you might, and I think the players generally do a pretty good job of keeping their composure. But dude, I think you might get what we deserve. I think we would be a better society if people who acted like that occasionally caught some hands.
I think it also ties into maybe the discourse that you see on social media. People will say things behind like anonymous accounts that most of them would not say if their actual name and IP address were on them, right? I feel like that happens a lot. It's not to say, and look, there's plenty of people who are crazy out there who will say whatever to whenever. But I think what you're talking about when it comes to the football part, again, we're talking about guys who just, if somebody stormed the field, there's probably a good chance it was a big upset. So the people who got upset are probably especially emotional because it just went really bad
Especially
for them.
upset. Yeah.
Yeah. And all of a sudden somebody's in their face who's probably a lot smaller than them, who are like mocking them. Yeah, that doesn't seem like a good idea to me.
Yeah. So anyway, again, I don't want to be the one necessarily like in endorsing violence, but maybe like just a few more people need to be like sort of like put in their place a little bit. Hey man, don't act like a jerk. That's my point. Like little bit of wisdom here is, folks, don't act like a jerk. We be better to each other. All right, we'll be back with in a second with Dane Brugler, our NFL draft expert from The Athletic, to talk all things combine, and Fernando Mendoza and a whole bunch of other stuff. And we're back, and our very special guest today is our colleague. And I'm very excited, by the way. One of the cool things about joining The Athletic a year and a half ago was to have Dane Brugler as a colleague, because he is awesome at his job. I'm going to make you blush here, Dane, and an incredible resource. Like, it's awesome to simply have, and I'm sure you do this too, Bruce. It's great for me, and I hope I don't do it too much, Dane. If I do, please tell me. Every once in a while, you're writing about a player, and you're like, I wonder what his draft stock status is. Let me Slack Dane real fast. And again, I don't want to bother you too much with that stuff, but I tend to like lean on Dane a little bit of like, hey, can you give me a line about this or a thought about that? So anyway, Dane's here because the combine is next week. So we're going to talk some combine and some draft stuff. And so welcome, Dane. Thank you, Dane, for being so patient with me. And it's great to have you on.
Hey, it's always my pleasure to join my favorite college football podcast. It's that's what I'm here for. Is to, if you need a line on a player, that's the purpose of me at The Athletic. So I'm more than happy to help.
Ralph, don't feel bad, because I know Dane also has twins, and he has more than just twins, and so he's a young dad with a sizable group of kids, and I'm just thinking I think they're all under 10 or something like that, and he is there. It's like, I can't tell you how many times I'll be like, hey, what about this? And he's like, it's almost like he is our version of AI when it comes to like, do you need an answer? And they're really well thought out answers. They're not just regurgitated here or there. So it's always great to have them on.
It is truly wild, because you can get stuff on players who are like, oh yeah, that guy's probably a 7th or UDFA grade. And it's like, wow, okay, man. Like, I can pretty much throw anybody who's like related to the draft class and get something from Dane. So anyway, we've blown enough smoke at you, Dane, here. Like,
and we're gonna take you down we're gonna take you down some rabbit holes if we do that in our own football nerdiness. I do want to bring up, I don't give you another little bit of sunshine here. So I did this story this week that ran yesterday on The Athletic about Fernando Mendoza and kind of his path from being at one point a 2-star recruit to now being the projected first pick in the draft. And I reached out to you maybe a day or two before we published it, just about like, hey, what are your thoughts about his evolution? And full credit to you. I don't know too many people who expected that much from Mendoza when he left Cal to go to Indiana. But tell the readers who haven't read the story yet where you were on him and when you kind of were like, okay, I can see him as a first-round quarterback. Like, because I feel like you were way ahead of the curve on this. I mean, for a lot of us, for sure.
Well, and I'll give credit to, because I was tipped off. So this was September 24, not this past year, the year before, when he was at Cal, had a West Coast scout say, hey, this is my favorite guy by far on the West Coast. And so I did a little more digging on him, watched more tape on him, and I was like, okay, I see it. His ability to layer throws, his accuracy, just the foundation of who he is as a quarterback, the mental process, that stood out in a big way. And so it was, okay, going now to Curt Cignetti's offense, a ready-made team and locker room where you just kind of put him in there and let him shine. This has a chance to be something. And so, in my way too early mock draft, first round, he was in there. My quarterback summer series where I kind of do my preseason rankings, He was one of the top quarterbacks with Arch and Lenora Sellers and Garrett Nussmeier, my preseason top 50. He was number 19 or something like that. So a guy that we thought, yeah, this looks like a future NFL starter. Now, this rest of the season will kind of tell us, all right, is he going to be a low-level starter, mid-level starter, maybe even a high-end starter? And the way the season played out, I don't think anybody expected that, but it leaned more towards, okay, this guy is going to be the number 1 overall pick and has a chance to be a really good pro.
What did you see about the marriage between him and Indiana that helped him reach his ceiling? Because, Cignetti uses this a lot. He uses this line a lot. Everywhere I go, the quarterback wins conference player of the year. And I think he's right, by the way.
Except for last year. So it was Dylan Gabriel was the Big Ten player of the year. Curtis Rourke was second team. But Cignetti quickly points out, Curtis Rourke led the nation in QBR.
And Rourke got hurt, and may have been different if Rourke didn't get hurt and miss a couple of games. So, but nonetheless, Rourke had a great year too. I think he may have even gotten into camp despite all of his injuries, or even gotten was he a 7th round pick? Anyway, what is it about Indiana's system that you think got the most out of Mendoza?
Well, it's a very RPO heavy offensive structure, and it really just accentuates Mendoza's strengths because he's very cerebral. He has such a good feel for touch as a passer, but then also where to go with the football. You rarely see him fooled pre-snap. That's just, and it's unlike, say, Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels or Drake May, the guys where we talked about as top guys, but their superpowers are more physical and it's easy to spot on tape with the way they move, the way they throw the football. And Mendoza, it's not like he's lacking in the physical tools department, but his superpower is more his ability to know exactly where to go with the football, regardless of what you throw at him. You want to blitz him? Good luck. I learned that the hard way. And he has the confidence that is really special, where he can make a mistake, come right back. I think about the pick 6 he threw against Oregon. Very next drive, 12 plays, touchdown, and that pretty much sealed it in Eugene. So the final 2 minutes of Penn State, the 5 key throws he had against Ohio State, that really was the difference in that one. And then, of course, the national championship game, the plays he made, especially in that second half. So the physical traits are fine. Good size, fluid arm. He can do some things outside of structure, but really it's the mental process that separates him. And when you think about that offense in Indiana, it was just a perfect marriage. And I think part of that too, the offensive line, the receivers, the running game, everything just clicked. And so it was partly everything coming together at the right time for Indiana to go on that type of run, but also credit to the coaches and, just to understand, okay, these are the strengths of what we have, and this is how we're going to go make it work. And Mendoza was the spearhead of that.
The thing that jumped out at me from talking to guys, and we saw him a lot this year too, but the thing that jumped out at me the most was a line from a defensive coordinator who played him in the playoff. And he said, you can affect him, you cannot rattle him. And the point in that was that you can get him, but he's coming back the next series and he's going right to work. And so he doesn't stay down. Now, when I had kind of drilled down deeper on that, Chandler Whitmer, who had been an assistant with the Chargers and also with the Falcons, and then he spent the year basically as the quarterback coach for IU, and now he's since left and he's with the Bucks. But he had talked about he didn't think he was like that when he was at Cal, and he said even in the spring, he goes, I'd see the look on his face when adversity would hit. I was like, oof, we got to get him back. And you go back, and Dane, you mentioned in that Iowa game, really tough defense. The game is tied. He leads them on a 2-minute drive to a touchdown drive. They win the game. The next game they play at Oregon, I thought he throws a pick 6. I was like, here it goes. Because remember, at that point, they only played 2 really tough opponents, they being Indiana, before in 2024. Didn't look very good against Ohio State, didn't look very good against Notre Dame. And when you talk to coaches on the team, they would be like, hey, the moment was almost too big. We're coming in as an underdog. Something flipped. Well, in that Oregon game, he leads them on the drive. the adversity at Penn State, tough place to play. You can go back to he got banged around. I mean, Ralph and I were in the building when Miami got after him, sometimes after the whistle, sometimes, when it shouldn't have been. He took some shots. He looked like it was a little bit not 100%, and he made the plays when he needed to. And I think that aspect of how he handles adversity and bouncing back from it, to me, is as good a barometer. I'm not saying he's going to be Tom Brady or he's going to be, whoever in the NFL, because so much, as you guys know, a lot of it is what's around you. Who's your coach? What's the system you have? What's the talent you have? But I could see why that was a bigger thing. Ralph, I want to go back to what Dane said earlier. Let's put ourselves back a year from now when Indiana signs Fernando Mendoza, right? And they get him. What was your expectation and how, good on you, Dane. And good on the West Coast scout for, being that prescient. But I don't know, he was impressive when he played Miami, when they almost beat Miami mid-season 2024. But what did you think, Ralph? And when it comes to this, where are you on the, oh my God, how do we miss this? Or is it, how much of it is Signetti?
Yeah, I think, I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, but because of Dane and a couple of others, I'm thinking of Nate Tice, who was sort of on Mendoza. It raised Mendoza's sort of the awareness of him. And I had seen him, been big athletic kid. But the thing that I was super interested in is, again, I sort of buy into Signetti at this point because his track record. So this is my one place where I can tell you my bona fides. I almost picked him in our Heisman draft. Now, almost picked him doesn't necessarily help because he was unpicked and we ended up with nothing. But
Who did you pick instead? I
ended up picking Marcel Reed, but in the blibbit for Marcel Reed, I said the other guy I was going to go with here was Fernando Mendoza. I'm surprised he didn't get selected. So he was not totally off my radar. I'm not going to say I saw this coming, but I did think the marriage between him and Indiana was interesting. So again, I'm not Dane and, in terms of being that prescient here, but I will absolutely give myself a little credit for saying the marriage of that player in that system had me intrigued.
Well, I was gonna pivot to Indiana as a big thing for Dane, just to go back to so I don't know, at some point you and I had this conversation about how many guys are draftable guys. I think they have 9 players invited to the combine.
Yeah.
9 players and no Kalon Black, who would test really well if he was there, running back who played really well as the year went on. No Kamara, super pro. Yeah. No Daly. Daly was hurt, but he had 19 TFLs and he has a track background. I would assume, maybe I'm wrong, I know Kamara doesn't look like what you'd want an edge rusher to look like. It's a pretty good bet that they could have 12 players drafted.
Yeah, it's when you look at it through that lens, it's okay, well, no wonder they won a national title when they're going to have double-digit players drafted and several in the top 50, top 60. Obviously, number one, Fernando Mendoza will be the number 1 overall pick. That's done. And then it's when do these receivers come off the board? Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper Jr., D'Angelo Pons. The size is working against him. There's no way around that. But the combine next week, he should. He's a former 100-meter champ in Florida. The way he plays, where he carries himself, I think he's going to help himself. And so we're going to see 4 or 5 of these guys go top 100. And then there's not a big drop off on day 3. We're going to see another handful of guys. And that's even with a Carter Smith, left tackle, going back to the Hoosiers, who would have been a day 2 pick if he declared. So that Indiana team is, they were tabbed as the underdog, obviously, but they've got NFL dudes up and down that roster.
You had mentioned before as we were tuning up here to get on the air, that how much you learn, how important the combine is to you as sort of as a learning experience in the whole draft process. Why? Because I think a lot of folks, listen, we all will sit down sometime. We're football fans. So yes, I will find myself watching a bunch of linemen sprinting on, in the afternoon on a Friday being what am I doing with my life? But because I'm not necessarily getting anything out of it, but I will enjoy it. What are you getting out of it? Because I think there's a lot of folks who are like, oh, Jim Short Olympics, what's that big deal? Why did that even matter? As someone who evaluates like teams evaluate, what do you get out of the combine?
Yeah, there's definitely negative connotations with what I think the general public thinks or views of the combine. One of my mentors when I first started scouting is C.O. Bricado, who legendary scout. And he always told me the people that don't value the combine, they just don't know how to properly use it. And I think that the value of the combine is the context. Like all the reports, like scouting reports and a lot of the work is already done on these players, but it's these little bits of information that you're able to pick up, whether it's through talking to players, talking to coaches, talking to pretty much whoever. Because, I mean, you guys know the Indianapolis becomes Football Central next week. It's something that is amazing. We just walk down the street and you can't help but run into a coach or run into somebody that's going to be able to talk to them for a few minutes and gain something. So there's 318 players invited. That the on-field stuff is really important. The agility drills, the speed drills, the position drills, seeing those guys move in person is really valuable for me. So, watching Spencer Fano and Monroe Freeling work out back to back, just seeing the way they move in my brain, that helps me just understand their movement patterns and just how athletic they are, aside from the data that we get from the testing. But more so than any of that is being able to talk to people. My whole job is basically watching tape and talking to scouts. That's really the bulk of my job. At the combine, I'm able to expand that even further and bump into people that maybe I haven't talked to in 6 months or since last combine or whatever, and able to pick up little things from them that is, really important to my process. So for me, the whole week I'm there Saturday to Sunday. It's funny because, inside baseball, the combine's big for the athletic for us as a company, our NFL staff. Right. We have a big summit and all that kind of stuff. I've never been to anything because I can't. I don't have time. So I don't. There's still a lot of people that I work with that I've never actually met in person because just don't have the opportunity because this is the biggest week of the year. But there's just a lot of value in the context that the combine provides.
I think another false narrative, but I want you to clarify for me because I think fans will look at it and go, when we'll hear things like combine risers, combine fallers.
Right.
I'm sure that happens, but again, can you give context to the idea of what it means to be a riser? Like, is it like, could somebody literally go from a round or like 10, 15, 20 picks? Or is it a matter of like, oh, that guy, I thought of him as a mid-first rounder. Maybe we nudge him up a little bit. Like, what does it mean to be a combine riser and faller?
I think it's more of, okay, you've got these 5 receivers in a stack. One guy goes and runs a 4.2. All right, well, I'm going to move him to the top of the stack now. I think it's closer to that as opposed to, oh, this guy's a 3rd round pick. Now he's going to maybe go 1st round. It's more of that where there will be some fluctuation, no doubt about it. But if we know a guy is fast already, are we really going to bump him up that much because he actually did it on a track? Like we knew you were fast already, and so I think there's an element of just not counting it twice because we already have this player in the 2nd round because we know he's fast on the field and all that. So if he goes out and sets the combine record, I don't think that should necessarily mean we give him that automatic bump into the 1st round. But you know what? Some teams they are more married to the numbers and the results and the data where other teams are not. And so it really is a team by team thing. But Brendan Thompson from Mississippi State, wide receiver, he's my pick for the fastest 40. If he goes out there and runs a 4.22 and challenges the record, all of a sudden, are we talking about him as a top 40 pick? Maybe. I mean, it's possible. I think he's more of a 3rd round type of player. But for some teams, that might be the validation they were looking for to move up just a little bit. But I think more so the risers, fallers from the combine, it's from the medicals. It's from the interviews where maybe a guy, it's the way a lot of teams work is, the medicals, it's a number system. And, if it's a 1 or a 2, we can take you. But if it's a 3 or a 4, cross him out. He's a box player for us. We can't do that. So, I do think that the medicals more than anything else will determine whether a guy is moving up or down on teams' boards.
All right, we're going to go to a quick break, and then we're going to come back. And I have a question for you, Dane, that I feel like is a better question for me to ask you offline. But I'm going to do it here because I feel like it's relevant to a lot of people. All right, we're back with Dane. Dane, the question I have for you is, so last year, one of the pieces I worked on for The Athletic before the draft was talking to a lot of college coaches about these players. And one of the guys who was off some teams' draft boards was a very athletic edge rusher named James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee. Falcons drafted him, had some really impressive moments on the field as a rookie. And then after the season, bad off-field news, he may never play in the NFL again, right? And I feel like we've had some conversations, you and I, offline a lot about somebody's character and this and that. And it's always tricky for me to write it, especially because you're getting a lot anonymous sourcing, and people, and I get why they do it, will jump on it because they either feel like it's bad mouthing somebody or it's out of line to report these kinds of things. And I go back to probably like 5 years ago, George Pickens is coming up in the draft. And I had a lot of coaches who are like either recruited him or knew him and knew a bunch of stuff about him, or just like, he's really talented. We're not messing with him, right? And so I remember I have a dad friend, our kids play sports together, and he's a huge Steelers guy. And I was with him the day that the Steelers drafted him. We talked a lot about it. And then George Pickens ended up having a lot of impressive, flashy moments for the Steelers. And obviously, I think he went to the Pro Bowl this year for the Cowboys, but it's been pretty turbulent. How do you, factor in the character piece? Because, somebody could go to the combine and interview, and unless they totally bomb it, you're not going to like put out the fire, right? About all the background stuff. But how do you factor it in? And then also, how do you deal with it when you're putting it out there in your own reporting to be like, hey, this is something, but you can't, it's anonymous sourcing or whatnot. I know there's different degrees of the character questions when it becomes to legal or when it becomes to like all sorts of other ends about football intelligence or, how reliable is he? I mean, plenty of people didn't have legal issues, but they may be on lists all the time because they can't get to anything on time. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a great question because it is one of the hardest things that I deal with. And along the lines of what you were just saying, it's hard to know how to talk about because fans want transparency. They want to know, and that's really my goal as in this job is to be transparent with everything. This is why I like this player. This is why I don't like this player. This is why scouts are excited about him or not. But and so I want to share all of that. But sometimes it gets a little murky. If a player, if a scout or a coach tells me, hey, we have to limit our playbook for him because he can't process it, I don't feel comfortable necessarily sharing that because I feel like I'm killing this kid and I don't want to do that. So it's a fine line of giving fans and readers transparency while also not wanting to just demolish this kid, especially before he's drafted. An example in the last few years, Rashee Rice, who I had as coming into that year, that his senior year at SMU, my number one receiver. Big fan of Rashee Rice, thought he was a stud. And then when we got to like November, he went from high in my top 100 to didn't make the top 100. And I got so many questions and I said, well, I danced around it because I didn't know how to answer it. The real answer was the character feedback was it was really, really tough. And there were a lot of stories that I just don't feel comfortable repeating that made me just take them off the top 100 altogether. And it is tough because look, I would not have wanted somebody to judge 22-year-old me and think that's the full version of me, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way. But at the same time, some of these guys have more of a more baggage than others. And Rashee Rice was one of those, and we're seeing in the NFL right now some of his struggles. So another similar to the James Pierce example that you gave, Bruce. It is really tough with medicals and with character, because all these guys, not all, a lot of these guys have something going on, and feeling okay about what to share, what not to share. That is something that is a fine line that I am honestly still learning year by year, case by case, individual by individual, about what's appropriate, what's not, what is my job as in this position to share. And so it really is a fine line.
Yeah, because you've got to hit journalistic standards too. You're a football scout, but you need to adhere to journalistic standards, which is, hey, if somebody gives you an anonymous piece of information, you can do some work to verify it, but depending on what that anonymous piece of information is, you might not be able to report it exactly as if somebody is not going to put their name on it. Right. If you're going to, if some coach or scout comes to you and says, I know this about Rashee Rice or James Pierce, and here's my name, you can quote me on it. Well, that's one thing. But for you to have to sort of process that information and then give it to our readers, as much as you want to have a responsibility to our readers, there's also a journalistic responsibility and a responsibility to the kid. Let me ask, Pickens might be the answer here. But can you think of a player where some of the feedback, yeah, that wasn't great, but as it turns out, once he got into the NFL, maybe he was a little bit of a handful, but it turned out okay. Kid grew up. I don't know. I'm putting you on the spot. I don't know if you can pull somebody up.
Can I throw one at you, Dane, while you're thinking?
Was he drafted in 1998?
No.
I was thinking not Randy Moss, receiver from Marshall.
Yeah, the guy I'm thinking of course. And Ralph, this is in your old stomping ground. Jeffrey Simmons had a horrible
It's a good one.
incident on video from when he was in high school. And, I think, Mississippi State disciplined him up to some degree. As far as I know, he had no issues in Starkville when he got there as a player. And he's been a terrific player on the field. But also, I want to say he was nominated for the Titans Man of the Year at some point, for the Walter Payton Award, right? And so, that was an ugly incident that was caught on video, where I think he was either stepped into a fight with, maybe his sister was involved with another woman in a fight or something.
Yeah.
I remember the video.
I remember
was pretty,
it. Yeah. I wasn't there at the time covering it, but it was an ugly thing. Yeah, it was definitely hey man, this man put his hands on a woman. That's not great. Needless to say.
And the guy that plays right next to him with the Titans, Sweat from Texas, who had a DUI 3 weeks before the draft. And this was a guy that was admittedly a big time partier. I mean, he told scouts it wasn't until his senior year that he really buckled down. And, he was proud of the fact that he was a class clown and that type of thing. And senior year, he buckled in. A lot of scouts still weren't sold, and then he has DUI. It's okay. Well, how do we possibly draft this guy anywhere near where the talent says he should be? Titans took a little bit of a risk, and they drafted him top 40. And so far, so good. It's turned out okay. But yeah, it's the injury stuff is definitely interesting too. I just this week got a tip that from a scout, hey, Isaiah World's not going to be at the combine. So, well, that's curious. That the tackle from Oregon, has top 100 ability. The tape was up and down this year, but just based on the traits, he could be a day 2 pick. And so the more I dug, found out towards the ACL and just before halftime in the playoff game against Indiana. That's why he pulled out of the Senior Bowl. And so talked to enough people at Oregon and people around Isaiah that I felt comfortable going with that and reporting it. But it's, you get a lot of things from scouts, and I'm sure you guys same way. You pick up a lot of information along the way and have to kind of figure out what's appropriate to share and report and what's maybe just kind of keep in your back pocket.
So we talked a lot about Mendoza being the clear top quarterback in this class. It is not a very good quarterback draft as it's shaping up. The guy who Stu, Ralph, and I all voted for in the Heisman is not Mendoza. It's Vanderbilt's quarterback, Diego Pavia. He obviously had an amazing career and was an amazing addition for Vandy. Now we know his height. I mean, he is not 6 feet. He measured under 5'10", 5'9" and change, right, Dane? So,
which anybody who stood next to him, and I have, was not surprised. I'm about 5-ish 10, and I looked right eye to eye with Diego. So the idea that he was 6 foot wasn't fooling anybody who's been near him.
So some of the things, talking to some scouts who were down in Mobile, they didn't love him in terms of his, I don't know if we want to call it his demeanor or his, like how he came across, I think was a little bit, I don't know. They were just like a little bit turned off at times. I don't know if that's more posturing or not. What is your sense on Pavia as a prospect and how people are viewing him going into this?
Yeah, I mean, his skill set it's both unique and limited. He's very accurate in the short to intermediate game, slants, digs, screens, outs. That bulldog competitiveness that he plays with, it's exceptional, like in all phases, but especially as a runner. And I think that's what really, that backyard style really helps him, especially with what they did at Vanderbilt, moving the pocket, quarterback run game. Those are staples of what Vanderbilt did. And Pavia was able to execute that at a very high level. And that makes it tough to defend at a college level. But NFL offenses are just far more expansive. And that backyard style is going to catch up with him. And so, especially against NFL level speed, it's just different. So you love the gamer, you love the confidence, the mobility. And I think you really like how he has elevated every offense he's ever been a part of in his life. He has made the offense better. But at a certain point, you kind of reach your ceiling. And I think that's where we are with Pavia, where the lack of ideal size, the lack of ideal arm, it's just going to be tough to overcome versus NFL level speed. And so I do think he has backup potential, especially if you're an RPO based offense and you're with a play caller who's willing to kind of limit the menu to accentuate what you do best. But I do think he'll help himself during the interviews at the combine if, when he sits down with some coaches and they feed off of that competitiveness that he has. The scouts are not going to like him. I don't know many scouts that have a draftable grade. I'll put it this way. I know more scouts that have a PFA, priority free agent grade on him compared to scouts that believe he's late round draftable. Now, again, once coaches get involved, that could help him maybe get one of those late round draft picks, but I think there's a better chance he goes undrafted. So we'll have to see how next week goes in Indianapolis.
Just a quick anecdote out. So I went to cover Missouri Vanderbilt this year. I was on the sidelines, and I don't know a lot of scouts, but I was standing next to one I do know a little bit, and it was during warmups. And again, like you see him out there, and he's not that tall. He's built like a wrestler. He's got no neck. He's like, warming up with headphones in, which were wired headphones, which I thought was especially interesting. I don't know, that really stood out to me. Like, who wears wired headphones these days? But the point was, so I turned to the scout and I was like, can you believe that's the best player in the SEC? And he said, if I was just picking from the guys who I'm watching on the field right now, he would be the last player I would pick. Like just for my team, because he looks nothing like what I would want out of the player. So it'll be super fascinating. So you also mentioned running back as a particularly thin draft group. Can you put a little perspective on quarterbacks, running backs, and conceivably how few of them we could have in the first part of this draft? And I guess the other part of it, just to tie it to the combine, since that's the next big thing. Anybody you're looking at that you think maybe that's somebody who could work their way up via the combine from that group of position groups?
Yeah, usually, sometimes we have light quarterback classes. Sometimes we have light running back classes. Rarely do we have both in the same year. And so I thought this was interesting. If you combine the two positions, there have been at least 10 quarterbacks and running backs drafted in the top 100 picks going back 40 years. There's a good chance that streak ends this year. I have 6, 3 quarterbacks, 3 running backs currently in my top 100. And now, could we see some guys get overdrafted, sneak into that top 100? Sure. But it still seems unlikely we're going to get to 10. So that would be the first time since 1985 that we do not have we do not reach double digits combined between those two positions in the top 100 picks. And, I think NIL plays a part. Just guys that wanted to go back to school. I think about the BYU running back; he would have been in that mix to go. Obviously the quarterbacks that decided to go back to school. That affects NIL. Guys feeling there's unfinished
Dante
business.
Moore right from the top, obviously was almost
Moore,
certainly a first rounder. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know, maybe Trinidad Chambliss would have got into that third round. Undersized guy, but he's electric and it has some big playability. Maybe Darian Mensah, if he came out, would have been in that third round as well. Sorsby would have been somewhere on that day 2 range. Obviously Arch. So a lot of guys that would have gone in the top 100 are going to be playing on Saturdays next year. And these things are cyclical, and especially with the evolving modern day college football. You think about 2 years ago when we had that great 2024 class with Caleb Williams and Drake May, and those guys were the underclassmen. But we also had Bo Nix, who was a 5-year starter in college. Penix was a 6-year guy. So guys benefiting from the COVID year and just the way that things are always evolving. Well, I think next year, the last 2 years have not been great quarterback classes. Next year could be that one where it's like, okay, we've been kind of building up to next year with 4 or 5, 6 first-round picks potentially. The running back class is, I think it's just an off class. And maybe we see some guys get bumped up, whether that's, Mike Washington from Arkansas. I think he's going to have a good week next week at the Combine. He's someone that had a good Senior Bowl, really good season in the SEC for an Arkansas team that struggled, but the offense was good enough to win more than 2 games or whatever they won. So I think Mike Washington, it's a bummer. Nick Singleton from Penn State's injured. We won't get to see his testing numbers. He would have been pretty remarkable in the 40 and some of those testing drills. Eli Heidenreich from Navy. I'm eager to see him. I think he's kind of one of those, when teams really boil it down and look at what he offers, is he a running back? Is he a slot receiver? I think he's a good football player. And that's overall, that's going to be the theme of this draft, is like, let's just draft good football players, whether it's the safety, like a Caleb Downs in the top 10, or, Jeremiah Love in the top 10. Ioane, the guard from Penn State's one of the best players in this draft, full stop, but he's a guard. And so, it's, where do you feel comfortable drafting a player like that? Just draft good football players. To me, that's going to be, because every draft has its own identity. The identity of this draft is just going to be that. Let's worry about upside later. Let's just draft good football players.
So before you go, right, Bruce, I just want to throw one quick thing in. So we did a college football writers mock draft that will be out next week, just to tease it a little bit. And one of my picks, I made a pick for the Giants and just picked Caleb Downs as number 5 overall. And that's high for a safety. But so after I did it, I did what I always do. I slacked Dane, like, hey man, I'm thinking about doing this with like Downs, and is that crazy for a safety? It has been like 2017 since a safety went in the top 10. And of course, Dane messages back to me by the way, like, yes, I just worked on a 7-round mock for the Giants, and I have him going with Caleb Downs. So yes, that idea of like, just pick good football players. Like Caleb Downs is definitely one of those like just pick good football players type picks.
And where did the Giants head coach spend the last like 15 years? That's the just pick good football players franchise.
They did that with Kyle Hamilton, right? So
yeah, worked out okay.
Bigger safety,
unusual. Yeah.
I wanted to end, but there is something I feel like before my last question, I feel like I may have to ask you a second one, just because Ralph and I and Stu talked about the projected quarterback class of 2027. You had, we pumped you up about being prescient on Mendoza. If we asked you right now, like over under 4 quarterbacks in this time next year that we're talking about as first round guys, who would those 4 be? Or who would be how many guys do you think have a very good chance of being first round quarterbacks next year?
So we got to start with Arch, obviously. I firmly believe if Arch was in this class, he would we'd be debating about who the Raiders should take at number 1. And that's just based off of trajectory and where we feel like Arch is headed. So much of where these guys are going to be drafted depends on how they play 2026, right? I mean, Cam Ward, didn't matter what he did at Washington State. What he did at Miami got him drafted number 1 overall. So that's a big part of this. And we'll have to see how some of these guys play out. But Dante Moore should be in a good situation where he should get better and just build off of what he did this past year. So Arch Manning, Dante Moore. I am a really big Brandon Sorsby fan. I'm very interested to see how it works out now as a transfer. And, I think he has the ability. He's been working with Rich Scangarello, a longtime NFL quarterback coach, and talking to Rich and just him telling me kind of the things he's been working on and getting better at. Very excited about where Sorsby's headed. Not ready to say like definitely first round pick just yet. Sellers is still up there, right? And then you've got the underclassmen coming up, the Julian Sayans, the CJ Carrs. Been really impressed with CJ Carr with the confidence that he plays with. So Manning and Moore are the only two that I feel really good that, all right, these guys are first round picks. And then it's a matter of who takes that next step. Is it CJ Carr? Is it Sorsby? Is it Lenora Sellers? At least 2 of those guys should do it though. So I think it's fair to feel, next year's quarterback class is always better, right? But I think it's fair to have optimism about the promise that next year shows.
All right, last question. Who's the one guy you feel you would stand on the table for in this draft who you're probably higher on than other people doing mock drafts seem to be?
It's probably D'Angelo Pons. I think he's a top 50 pick all day. I mean, top 40 pick. I get it. The size is the size, but the way he plays with that mentality, I just feel like he rarely, against Jeremiah Smith, yes, there were times where it looked like he got little brothered at times, just because of the sheer
Jeremiah
size
Smith does that to pretty much everybody, though.
Exactly. So, but every other receiver that he went up against, it looked like he didn't look like he was undersized, undermanned, underpowered at all. So I'll bet on the football player all day like that. I think he's a really good player. This is a draft where, again, it's just about drafting good football players. So like I mentioned, Ioane from Penn State, the guard, easy argument. He's the best offensive lineman in this class. So I think there's a lot of guys like that where it's just, he might be this, might not have this. Just draft good football players. And there's a lot of guys along those lines.
All right. That is Dane Brugler. He is our probably most esteemed colleague on our college football group at The Athletic. He does amazing work on the draft. As you can tell, read him, follow him it's DP Brugler, right, on Twitter.
Yep.
So, and look forward to seeing you next week in Indy. And hopefully we will have you on again soon before the draft.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.